Let us pray. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, it is good to be back with you on this second Sunday of 2021. I had an opportunity this past week and a half to take some time off for rest and for reading, long walks, and I couldn't seem to help it but sermon planning. Last Sunday is actually one of my favorite Sundays to preach, for it is Epiphany Sunday. However, Epiphany doesn't actually fall until January 6th, 12 days after Christmas. And we talk about having an epiphany, about having an aha moment. But I realized that probably isn't the technical term. And so I was curious as to what the actual definition of an epiphany was. Well, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, an epiphany can happen in three ways. One, usually a sudden manifestation or perception of the essential nature or meaning of something. Number two, an intuitive grasp of reality through something, such as an event, usually simple and striking. Or three, an illuminating discovery, realization, or disclosure. Well, this past Wednesday, I found myself sitting on the floor of my living room experiencing an epiphany, a grasp of reality through an event and an illuminating realization. I sat there, as many of you did, glued to my television, watching as our nation's capital was swarmed by rioters, and watching our elected men and women of Congress dive to the floor for shelter, like the thousands of children around our nation do in preparation for active shooters in schools. In the aftermath, I heard time and time again, this is not America. This is not who we are. And what was my epiphany? What did I realize? I realized that yes indeed, this is part of who we are. We saw it in front of our own eyes. We saw media equipment smashed and cords created to make a noose. We saw a gallows erected. This anger, this violence is part of America right now. But the question that I am left to ponder with, the question that I want to wrestle with is this who we want to be? Because I don't think that the vast majority of us want this. I don't think we want violence and hatred towards one another. As followers of Christ, we remember when Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And so I think the question for us to live into is, how are we making peace? How are we making peace in ourselves, in our relationships, in our communities, with those who are different from us, and in the world? And so today I want to continue preaching on Epiphany, a day in which we remember the visit of the Magi, who came to kneel at the manger, who followed a star in faith to find the Prince of Peace. Today we finish our sermon series on those who dream. And this series closes with the idea that those who dream persevere. We know that our dreams don't always manifest right away. Sometimes we have to work for our dreams. And in our dreams for our country, there is work to be done. But in that, we can persevere. The word epiphany actually comes from a Greek word meaning manifestation. And this holiday was it began as a feast of the church, and it began in the Eastern Church, where it was in honor of Jesus's baptism. And it was sometimes in connection with the Nativity. But over the years, at least in the Western Church, it's become less about the baptism of Jesus and more about the manifestation, the appearing of Christ to the Gentiles as represented by the visiting of the Magi. And it's celebrated 12 days after Christmas. I recently read an article from Vox, and it was entitled "The 12 Days of Christmas, the story behind the holiday's most annoying carol." Now, personally, I kind of like the song, but I know that sentiment is not universal, and you do not have to agree with me. But according to this article, the history of that carol is a little bit murky. The earliest known version first appeared in a 1780s children's book called Mirth Without Mischief. And a first edition of this children's book sold in 2014 for over $23,000. But many historians agree that this was a song that was designed to be a memory and forfeits game. A song in which the singer is tested with their recall of the lyrics. And if they make a mistake of any kind, they have to award their opponent with forfeit, like a kiss or a favor or a treat of some kind. There are some who have argued over the years that the 12 Days of Christmas is actually a coded primer on Christianity, the two turtle doves being the two testaments, Old and New, the four calling birds being the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 6 geese, the 6 days of creation, and the partridge in a pear tree is and represents Jesus Christ. And I think this is a fascinating and fun theory, but it is just that, and it has been debunked many times for many historical merit, but still is interesting to think about and a lot of fun. Others have gone really deep into this song, and they have calculated how much all of the gifts would actually have cost. In my opinion, these people have had way too much time on their hands. But just in case you're interested, based on 2018 market rates, it would have cost about $39,000. And I discovered that swans are really, really expensive. These are just some fun examinations of the song. But before we discount the 12 Days of Christmas as being just a silly song, we should remember that just as our hymns give us deep theological language to use, and they show us what the church has taught throughout the centuries, actually the song, the 12 Days of Christmas, does this as well. Because in it we are reminded that the message and the meaning of Christmas is not something that is limited to just one day out of the year. Around the world, Epiphany is known and celebrated also as Three Kings Day. In Spain and Latin America, children celebrate this day by leaving their shoes at the door of their house so that the three kings can come and leave them presents. Kind of like Santa Claus, right? And many of these families often leave gifts of salt or grass for the camels that the three kings were said to have ridden on. Kind of like the milk and cookies that we leave for Santa, right? Rosca del Rey is a sweetbread, and it's shaped like an oval. Literally, it's Ring of the King is the name, and it is eaten on January 6th. And in Mexico, there's traditionally a small little figurine of baby Jesus somewhere in that ring of bread. And it represents the Holy Family fleeing from King Herod and the massacre of the young children. And in Mexican culture, the person who finds baby Jesus in the bread keeps the figurine, and they are to bring it to church on February 2nd. And they also have the responsibility to host a dinner for others with traditional foods. So what happened? Those thousands of years ago, when some wise folks from a distant land saw a star, realized that something important and life-changing was happening, they dropped everything that was going on in their lives, and they traveled to a distant and strange land to find the King of the Jews. This morning, I'd like for us to hear the story once again and to draw our attention to some insights about these magi that I think are applicable to us today. And these points are illustrated by William V. Arnold in his Feasting on the Word commentary article. Matthew 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we have observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." A couple quick things for us to note here. First is the question, who is King Herod? This passage is pointing us to two different kings. A child who has been born King of the Jews and King Herod. Now, I've heard it said that Herod is history's most hysterical megalomaniac. The Jewish historian Josephus described him as a ruthless, egocentric ruler. His father Antipater, a Jew of Idumean descent, had a position of great influence after the Roman conquest, and so he appointed his son, Herod, to become a military prefect of Galilee. Down the road, the Roman Senate gave Herod the title King of the Jews, and he ruled Judah as a loyal friend, an ally of Rome. Herod was made, or appointed, King of the Jews. And here are these wise men from the east asking for the child who is born King of the Jews. The one, on the one hand, who wears the literal crown, the one who brandishes all of the gaudy symbols of kingship, the one who will go on to have his soldiers massacre the children 2 years and younger, seeking to hold on to his position of power. And on the other hand, you have the Christ child, who will one day wear a crown of thorns, who is sleeping peacefully in the manger, one who will one day call his followers to put down the sword. A very different kind of king. Now, considering that Herod had many of his own family killed due to his paranoia and his desire for control and power, it's amazing that the three kings made it out of this story alive. And a quick side note for us, we don't actually know how many wise men, we don't know how many magi there were, because the text doesn't tell us. We only assume 3 based on the 3 gifts that they bring the Christ child. And these 3 men were magi. They were likely belonging to a priestly caste of astrologers, maybe from Persia, maybe from Babylon. And men like these were regularly consulted by kings because of their knowledge, because of their esoteric wisdom, their magical powers, and the thought that they had predictions to tell the future. Which brings us to our first point, that these 3 wise men had been studying. They didn't look up in the sky one day and say, "Oh my, that star is so bright. Maybe we should hit the road and see what that's all about." No, they had searched, they had studied, they had searched their sacred texts, they had studied their own pasts, and because of that study, they were able to recognize the sign when it appeared. Now, secondly, these magi not only studied their books, but they also they looked to the world around them. If they had only kept their heads down, they wouldn't have seen the star shining bright in the sky. Thirdly, these magi, they were curious. They were willing to seek confirmation over what they had studied and what they had seen. They moved, they put their feet, or maybe their camel's feet, in motion to follow the sign. They took a chance to be proven right or wrong. And here's my favorite point. These magi, they were willing to ask for directions along the way. "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews?" they asked. "We've come to pay him homage." I think that's such a good insight for life, right? This is the path of discipleship. The importance of study, of learning, of reading, but not to the detriment of not being aware of the world around us. Discipleship is a call to curiosity, a willingness to explore, of not being afraid of the possibility of being right or the possibility of being wrong. And finally, asking for directions when we get lost. Verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all of the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you will come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. For a land and a people who had already experienced so much turmoil and upheaval, the coming of a new king would not have been seen as good news by everyone, especially those who were actually prospering under Roman regime. The chief priests and the scribes that we will see appear time and time again during Jesus' life, they are not usually thrilled with what Jesus is teaching and doing. They are pretty happy to stay settled in the status quo. Verse 7, then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may go and pay him homage. When they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising. And still it stopped over a place where the child was. And they saw that the star had stopped. They were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering the house, they saw a child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and they paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. I came across a pretty funny article the other day in a Christian satirical website called The Babylon Bee. And this article was titled, Scholars Now Believe that Jesus ignored the Magi's gifts and just played with the boxes they came in. Man, we spent a long time trying to pick those gifts out, one Magi wrote in his personal journals. Oh well, at least they were nice boxes. Mary reportedly used a dab of the frankincense to calm herself down as Jesus attempted to stack the boxes up and perform dangerous parkour stunts on them. It made me chuckle when I stopped to think about the time that we often spend trying to pick out that perfect gift for someone, right? When really the value is found in the love that is expressed. There are a couple things here in these verses that are kind of interesting to me. First, from this passage, we can tell that time has passed, even up to 2 years. If we look later in the gospel, when it tells us that Herod had all of the children killed up to 2 years of age. Also, the Magi find Mary and Joseph in a house, and so their location seems to have changed. And Joseph doesn't appear to be home at the time that they first arrived. However, what is most striking to me is the joy of the Magi. They have traveled on this quest to pay homage to this child, the King of the Jews, and the gratitude they must have felt when they found him. The excitement they must have felt just jumps off the page to me. These are not Jewish men, but they have recognized the importance of this child, the Messiah. Verse 12. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. There's something powerful here. After their journey, after reaching this destination they had been traveling towards, they didn't just stop and plant themselves. They didn't try to curry favor by returning to Herod and letting him know where Jesus was. I honestly wonder how long they ended up staying with this young family, telling them their stories of how they saw the star, how they joined together to venture forth, and what they might have experienced along the way. I wonder how long they stayed to give encouragement to a young mother and father. How long they stayed to swing little Jesus up in their arms or play on the floor with him. Ultimately, probably it couldn't have been long, for we hear in verse 3 that Herod was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. Fear and compliance are common among the masses when those who hold power are frightened. And so for all of the joy and fulfillment that they experienced, the Magi, they were still listening for what is next. They were still listening for God's voice and God's direction. And God met them in a dream. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once spoke a beautiful, famous speech about a dream he had as he stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. He said, "So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain will be made low, and the rough places be made plain, and the crooked places be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together." Dr. King went on to say, "This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountains of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discord of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood." And so, what are your dreams? What are your dreams for this year? What are your dreams for the future? I dream a dream of hope that peace is possible. I dream of a day where hatred and violence and injustice is no more. I dream that good men and women of faith will speak joyfully of our God who leads us in paths of peace. What are your dreams? May all of our dreams reflect God's vision for the world, and with wisdom and in faith, we can persevere.